Hi everyone, welcome back to the Xojo webinar. I am Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist, and this is our first of our fall series of webinars, and we're going to be talking about menus, primarily, well, pretty much only on desktop and web. Let's dive right in. So, a little bit of an overview of what's available for desktop menus. First of all, the menu item class is primarily the one that you end up working with when you're designing your menu, and that is used for the actual menu items that are under top level menus. The main menu is what you see at the top, and you can design it with its own layout editor, and you can just drag things around, reposition them, add new menus, add new top level menus, add submenus, that sort of thing. All kinds of properties are available to set for your menu items, modifier keys, the actual text, whether you want icons, stuff like that. Auto enable is a very useful property that you're almost always going to want turned on for your menu items. And this allows them to be essentially called automatically or enabled automatically if there's code in their event handler. Also available is on the Windows, the enable menu items event handler. And that can be used for more sophisticated control of the menus. So in particular, if your menu items are set to auto enable off, then you can manually enable things in the enable menu item events handler based on other conditions in your app. Menu handlers are where you'll put the code that'll run when a particular menu is selected. And in addition to top-level main menus of your application, your app can also have contextual menus. And these you create in the construct contextual menu event for almost all of the controls that are available. And then there's a corresponding contextual menu action event that is called when something is actually selected from your contextual menu. So that's kind of an overview of what's available on desktop menus. We're going to look into some code and examples primarily for the rest of the webinar in a bit. I missed one thing, sorry. You can also display contextual menus using the pop-up method, which can be useful if you need a menu to appear in kind of a more unusual way. So moving on to what's available for web menus. There's a corresponding class called web menu item. And on the web, you can have contextual menus similar to the way they work on desktop. The web controls have a contextual menu property where you can set up your contextual menu. And then there's a corresponding contextual menu action event that gets called when something is selected. You can also have menus on toolbars. And that is when you add a web toolbar menu button to the toolbar, and that calls the menu action event on the toolbar. And essentially when you click a toolbar that's a menu, it gets a little drop-down menu below it. Web projects do not have main menu bars like you see in desktop apps. I suppose you could probably simulate one using a toolbar if you wanted, but that sort of UI is probably a little unusual for a web app, so in most cases it isn't worth emulating. All right, so for the rest of the webinar, I got several example projects I want to go through to show you how you can use menus in a few different ways. And if you have questions while we're going through these, feel free to type them into the Q&A window. So we're going to look at some desktop examples, an overview of menu bar itself and how you would use it in simple cases. We'll take a look at a project that can be used to create recent items menu and also a window menu. And on the web side, we'll take a look at how you can add a contextual menu to a list box. And then we'll also look at a menu on a toolbar. All right, so here we have Xojo. This is just a standard empty desktop project. You can see it just has the usual stuff, a window, and you always get the main menu bar added by default to your desktop projects. And by default, it just has just a couple menu items up here. There's application, which you can't really add anything to in the editor here, and then the file and the edit menus. You can add a new top level item using the button right up here. And then you can type in a name for its text. And you can see when you change the text, it also tweaks the name up here to use the text you entered, which is nice. I can just drag things around to reposition them. I can add an actual menu item to it. So you can see now it says help about. You can see the various properties that are here. I could actually put a key on this if I wanted, so that this would be Command A on Mac, but on Windows and Linux would end up being Control. And there's other things you can turn off if you need more precise control of your keyboard shortcuts. You can add the Shift key and Option key and Alt keys and that sort of stuff. And then to use a menu, you can see when you add a window, generally by default, they always have the menu bar set right down here. Now, the fact that this is selectable kind of might tell you that you could change it. And yeah, your projects can actually have multiple menu bars in them. And theoretically, you could switch them window by window if you really wanted to. But generally speaking, I'm not going to recommend that. Most apps do not do that, and users find it a little confusing when they're using a single app, and depending on what window they have open, the menus are all completely different. So in most cases, you're going to just want to have a single main menu for your app, and you're going to want to use that and not have a bunch of different ones. There are special cases where different ones might make sense, but in general cases, that's not the way you're going to want to go. But the important thing is you want to make sure that your main one shows up here. It's possible that you could accidentally set it to none or something like that, and that can cause perhaps behavior you don't expect when your menu bar is shown. The other thing to note, of course, about menu bars is just to be aware of the differences on platforms. On Mac, of course, the main menu bar is shown at the top of the screen, and on newer versions of Mac OS on the top of all the screens. On Windows, the menu bar is shown within the actual window. On Linux, it varies depending on which Linux distribution you're using. Some will show it within the window, some will show it at a single one at the top of the screen. But just be aware of those differences. Perhaps the biggest difference, of course, though, is on Mac. If you close all the windows in your app, the app itself won't quit, and you'll still be able to access the menu bar at the top. But on Windows and Linux, that won't be the case. So now if we want to add something to that About menu, I've got my window here. I can hit the plus button here, and you'll see there's a section called Menu Handler, which I can choose. And then right here in the drop-down, you'll see a list of all the menus that are in our menu bar that are available to be implemented, which is pretty much going to be the list of all of them that haven't been implemented yet on the window. And you can see the one I added here, Help About, and I can just select that. And then I can put code here, something simple. And this menu handler gets called when we choose that menu. So if I come up to our help menu that we added, you can see that it got called. Now that happened because the About menu here did have the auto enable property turned on. And as soon as I put the code in there, the menu became enabled. So if I were to go back to our menu handle here and remove this code, oops, I got to actually remove the menu handler. If I remove the menu handler, so if I haven't implemented anything, you can see it's grayed out. So it's pretty nice that you can just add your menu handler and put the code in, and it will automatically, oops, wrong thing, automatically enable it. Now, alternatively, you could do it, actually I want to put this back the way it was. And then I'm going to go back here. Now what happens if you have this set to off? Well, we do have the code here. But it's still grayed out. So there is another event. So say you wanted to enable that because of your app needs to be set up in a special way. Maybe some text needs to be entered in a field or something else needs to be selected before you want to enable the menu. You do have that control, and you can add the enable menu items event handler to the window. And then here you can check some condition. Let's see, let's add something we can check for a condition. We'll put a text field here. So if we type OK in the text field, then we can enable our, yeah, we'll do it like this. So we'll enable the menu. Sorry, I used the wrong one. Enabled is the one that has the assignment. I could have just typed enable. That's a method that will automatically enable it. So we can see here it's disabled, and hopefully when I type OK in the text field, it is now enabled and runs the code. So you can see that gives you a little bit more power over whether or not your menu items get enabled or disabled. Now, a reason you might want to be doing it this way is because you may have features in your menu that are only enabled, like I said earlier, in certain situations. Maybe they're only enabled for a more advanced version of your app and you don't want them enabled at all. Maybe they require users to have done something already, that sort of thing. So this gives you the control over the menu so you can enable and disable things appropriately. All right, so that's a high level of the simple process of setting up menus and using them in a window. Now let's take a quick look at actually before we jump into the recent item and window menus, let's look at the construct contextual item example. So if I run this and I right click, right now I'm right clicking on the background here of the window, you'll see I get a menu that appears with a bunch of items. One of them can be disabled, there can be some sub menus, and you can see here this sub menu here that is the help about is actually the same as this one up here. And you can see the two methods that are right here. There's the construct contextual menu method and then the contextual menu action method. And the construct method is where you actually just set up your menu. So passed into the event is the base menu. And you do get X and Y coordinates, but generally you're not really going to need to use those. The menu will appear for you automatically. You just append menu items to it. So you can see here I'm appending a simple test item to it. Here I created the menu item and created one that's disabled and set the enable property to false, and then I append it. Add another one. You can add separators. You can even add submenus, which is a menu item that has menu items appended to it. And then you can actually do a clone right here. That's what this is doing here, is it's cloning the help menu that is on the main menu bar and appending that to the bottom of this contextual menu. And you can't actually reuse the menu directly, so I couldn't just say append help menu, that wouldn't work, but you just call the clone method on it, it makes a copy of it, and you can use that in your contextual menu. So these are various ways you can easily set up contextual menus, which are pretty neat ways to add, sometimes more advanced features to your app. Maybe stuff that you want quicker access to so the user doesn't have to move the mouse, perhaps far across the screen to access something. So commonly used features can sometimes be on contextual menus, that sort of thing. But this is how you set them up. Pretty straightforward. So let's see how we can use these techniques to something else. So the first one we're going to look at here is example of a recent item menu. So we see here's nothing in here at the moment, but I can just choose some files. So let's see here, we got some simple files. Each time I add a file, its path is going to show up here. I got 2, let's pick 3. So we can see we got 3 here. The most recent one is appearing at the top. So we got a small, a logo, and a regular one. I can click the remove, and now there'll only be 2, and it removed the last one. So how is this implemented? Well, the first thing is there is a subclass of menu item that is called open recent menu item. And this subclass isn't really doing anything neat at the moment, but right now it's going to show you which item you happen to click on. But it could do anything here. This could be code that is opening up a new window in your app and then passing in, for example, the file, so that that window could do what it needs to do with the file, whatever that may be. But as you can see, subclass allows you to kind of customize that or make it work wherever you want. And if we look at the main menu bar, you can see there's an entry here for open recent, and it is set up as a submenu. Nothing is added to it, but that's how that is set up on the initial main menu bar layout. And then the actual code is also relatively simple here. We're just getting a prompting for files so we have stuff to show in the recent items menu. And then we're creating a new instance of our class. And by default, the constructor of menu item lets you pass in the, that doesn't show on the syntax help, but the title for the menu, the text that appears in the menu, and a tag value. And the tag value is a variant, so it can be anything. So for our particular example here, we're going to pass in text that is the actual path to the file. And then in the tag, we're going to pass in the actual folder item that points directly to the file. So that saves that right there in the menu item so you can access it later when it's actually selected. And then we just add it to the file open recent menu item that we already have on the main menu bar. And we always insert it at the top, so the most recently selected item appears to be the first one in the list, and that pushes all the other ones down. You could, of course, have your own code in here if there's a fixed amount that you want to have. You could throw, if the list gets larger than, you say 10 or something, you could throw away the last one, that sort of thing. Right now, this just keeps adding them, and then there's separate code on the remove that removes the last one at the bottom. So not really much code here is needed, but this lets you dynamically add items to your menu. And this is obviously useful for a wide variety of projects. Pretty much any project that lets you open files, you typically expect to see some sort of recent option to make it easier for your users to quickly access a file that they were previously working with, so they don't constantly have to go to file open and then find their file using the file selector dialogues. And of course, this sort of thing can be extended. If you have a preferences file or something like that, you would save in the last few recent items so that when your app starts, it can reload and repopulate them. But this is how you implement the menu itself. And this technique is pretty common for how you probably would implement custom stuff in a menu. So moving on to the next one is the window menu, which has a very similar design. So first of all, if you look at the main menu bar, I've added a new top level menu here, just called window menu. Nothing underneath it. I've created a menu item subclass called window menu item. This has a little bit more stuff on it. So you can see here, I actually added a constructor to pass in a window reference, and that is used to set the text that appears in the menu item, because we're just going to use the text from the window title. And it also saves a reference to the window itself so that it can be looked up later, so we know which window was selected for bringing it to the front, or when it was closed, so we know which one to remove from the list. And then the isWindow method just checks to see if the method that was requested is the actual one that we're pointing to. And the structure has code in two places in this particular case. So first of all, I'm going to run this before we go through that. So you can see right now, just the current one we have open is displayed here. And if I display some new windows, we get all of them. And I can pick them to jump around. If I go back to one and close it, no longer is in the list. All right, so let's see, where do I want to start here? I guess we can start with new document. You can see that's calling the create new window method. And this is what's creating a new window. So we create the new window. We're just assigning it a title, which is just something right now that counts each time a new window is created. And then it's added to the window menu. So we create a new instance of the window menu item subclass. We pass in new window, which is the window we just created, so that its title can be retrieved and displayed in the window menu itself. And then we append it to the window menu that's in the main menu bar. And that adds it to the list, so that each time you create a new window, it gets added to the list. Now this does require that you call this method each time you create a new window, rather than just doing it manually, because otherwise this extra code won't run to add it to the window menu. But it's your project, you can easily do that. The related method that is called here is the close window method. And when a window is closed, it loops through the items that are in the window menu and checks to find the one that is the actual window that was just closed. And then it removes that from the window menu list. So it gets rid of the one that was open when it was chosen to be closed. And you can see that is managed on the main window. You always have to call the close this window method so that it can do that lookup and remove itself from the window menu. And I'm trying to remember what this code does here. This is looping through the window. Oh, and putting the check mark in. Right. So you can see when we run the project, window 3 has a check mark, window 2. So that method, as we talked about earlier, enabled menu items, is called every time the menu is accessed. And this code loops through and finds out which one is the current one so that it can put the check mark next to it. And that's pretty much it. This gives you a simple kind of cross-platform way to get a window menu without too much code or too much hassle on your part, really. You can easily use this in your own projects without making a dramatic amount of changes. And of course, there are lots of other ways you could implement this sort of system. You could go with window subclasses if you wanted. You could encapsulate all this differently if you wanted. This is just one technique, but it does show you that you can easily manage open windows dynamically without much trouble. All right. I think that was it for the desktop ones. Yeah, the next two we want to look at are web stuff. Let me see here. Edwin has a comment. See if I can read this. Sometimes there are more menus inside the window menu besides its title, and closing something might raise an error if the window's reference to the menu item. I'm not sure I'm following that. And if you close the window's going to be closed. So I'm not sure if there's something else referencing the window, then I guess it's still going to be able to reference it, same as if you closed it normally. So I'm not really sure what that would mean. This doesn't close it beyond the actual action of closing things that would happen normally. All right, let's move on to the web stuff. Now, as I mentioned, web doesn't have main menus like desktop, but you can still have menus in your web projects. Oh, Edwin is noting the non-standard things that you might see on a window menu, like here, minimize, zoom, bring all to front, that sort of thing. And yes, absolutely. If you wanted to replicate that stuff in your project, you'd have to put in special cases so that those things are essentially skipped over the menu, the code that I've just shown, which only specifically deals with this bottom part here. All right, so back to web projects. So you can implement contextual menus on the page itself, controls that are in here. So if we run this, you can see I'm right-clicking right now on the list box, and I get a little contextual menu up here. And if I pick select, it marks it as selected. If I pick delete, it removes it from the list. So how does that work? Well, I have the list box here, and you'll remember there is two things you can do. And right now in the shown event handler, I'm setting up the menu. So I create a new web menu item. Oh my gosh, I forgot to capitalize the I. Phew, that would have messed me up for days. And I'm just appending two items to it, select and delete. And then I assign it to the contextual menu property. And this sets it up so that later when I right-click on this, the menu will appear. And then when the menu's appeared and you select something from it, the contextual menu action event handler gets called. And if something was selected, we can then do what we want. So I just get a select case on the actual text. And if the select item was selected, I'm just changing the style for that cell to a style that I think sets it bold and set the color to red. That's specified right here. Or I remove the row right from the list box. And of course, you can do whatever you want here, depending on your needs, but this is how you generally would set stuff up. And changing the style, just set up a style what you want, and then you can assign it to the cell style property to tweak it. So that's how you can do contextual menus in your web apps. Again, pretty simple. Doing it on a list box probably makes a lot of sense, so that you can have some nice easy access commands right there on the list box. But it can work with other controls or even the window itself. So use it how you will. All right, the last project is toolbar menu. So run this, show you what this looks like. This is just a very simple toolbar, just has one thing on it. And when I click it, I get a menu that pops up, some different options, which I can click, and they do different things. So let's look at how that is set up. So first of all, I have a toolbar here on the window. And if I put it in edit mode, you can see there's just a single button on it that, whoops, went out of edit mode. There we go. And you can see that it is set up as a web toolbar menu. And I've given it a simple name and caption. And I actually left has icon on. I could turn this off here so that there wouldn't be that odd little blank icon thingy. If I didn't need icons, maybe I wanted it to act more like a menu bar perhaps. And that's it. That's pretty much the setup that you have here. And then on the open event handler, you can you create the menu and then you add it to your toolbar item. So here I've created the date menu and I've appended our options: today, tomorrow, next week, or next month. And then I find the button, the date button that I want on the toolbar. So I use that by using the item with name method, giving it its name. And then once I found it and I have a reference to it, I can assign the menu we created to its menu property. So that sets it up so that when it's clicked, the menu that we just defined here gets displayed. And then once it's displayed and you choose something on it, the menu action event handler is called. And this gives you two parameters coming in: the item, so you can check which one of the buttons was chosen, because you of course could have multiple menu toolbar buttons on a single toolbar. And then you also get the choice that was selected here. So here I'm verifying that the date button is what was selected. And then if it is what was selected, then I can go through the choices. And then I've just got to select a case statement that goes through these. So if today was selected, I just use the now shared method to get the current date. And if tomorrow is chosen, I create a date interval, adding 1 day, or setting it to 1 day, and then I add it to the current date. That gives me tomorrow. Similar with next week, I create a date interval of 7 days, and I add it to the current date. And if it's next month, I create a date interval of 1 month, and I add it to the current date. And then we just display the date. So again, like with all the other examples, you can of course put whatever code you need for your app in these particular event handlers, but you have full, control over you can see what was selected so that you know what to do. So it's all pretty straightforward once you've done a couple of them. And hopefully these examples are something you can reference to help you out. And apparently I made a change, so I'm going to save that one. And I think that's the last example I have here. So let's switch back and see if we've got any questions. All right, so that is the end of what I have to show you for examples. These examples will all be included with 2016 release 4. Some of them are already there. I've updated them a bit for this webinar, so newer, sleeker examples will be included in the newer release, but you certainly can grab a couple of those in the current release if you want to take a look at them. I'll also have these available with the download for the video that you can access in the Dev Center and on YouTube, of course. And I'm just checking over here if there are any questions before we wrap up. And it looks like not. So I want to thank everyone for attending. We have another webinar next week, so be sure to tune in for that. And that's it. Have a great day.